Hey everyone, my name is Jess, and today we've got a bit of a different type of video for you. Over the summer, my wife and I bought a 3D printer, and for my first project, I decided to challenge myself by recreating the helmet of one of my favorite video game characters, the Rookie from Halo 3 ODST. This was a super fun project, and I learned a lot along the way, so I hope that you enjoy. For the print files, I decided to go with Galactic Armory's files that they offer on their website. And a big part of the inspiration behind the project actually came from their own ODST build series on their own channel. And when I saw how accessible prop making has become with 3D printing, I knew that I wanted to build something that was going to challenge me and also help me learn a new skill, while also it being something super cool and something that I could just show off to my friends. As for the technical stuff, I kept it pretty standard and didn't change much from what BambuStudio pre-selected for me. The printer that I have is a Bambu A1, and I used PLA matte white as my filament type. I didn't feel the need to resize the files, though what I did adjust is the infill to 15% and the wall loops to 2 based on what I saw most people doing online. I also ended up using tree supports as my support type to help cut back on filament and to preserve some of the finer details on the helmet. And in total, it took a little over 24 hours to print the 10 pre-cut pieces. I think it ended up amounting to about 800 grams of filament, including the supports, and thankfully, I had no failed prints. After about a day of printing, I had all of the pieces of the helmet ready to go, and it was time to start gluing them together. Now, just a quick disclaimer, again, I am super new to prop making, and during this process, I made a lot of mistakes. And I want to be sure to highlight them here, not just for my own learning, but hopefully to make it a little easier for anyone out there who's looking to do a project like this for themselves. A lot of the tips that I got came from the nice folks over at the 405th Discord server. So just a quick shout out to the members of the community that helped me along the way with this. I really appreciate it. Without spoiling too much, one thing that would have helped at this stage would have been to lightly sand down the edges that touch the printer bed before gluing the pieces together. Once I got to the dome, I noticed that some of the pieces weren't quite fitting together and left very small gaps in between pieces. You'll see in a bit how that affected the priming and the painting of this thing. This part was so fun, though. It was so cool to see this come together in real time. Also, in this time lapse, you can see a few other projects I was working on at the time, including a finished Magnum pistol from Halo Combat Evolved. I didn't take a lot of video or anything during that project, but I'll put a little something here. And a cute little oddish planter that my wife was working on painting. And after the super glue dried, I had a assembled and quite frankly badass looking helmet, though no paint on it yet. Again, a big shout out to Galactic Armory for their print files. I highly recommend them if you haven't checked them out already. Then came the very long, though very educational process of priming and sanding the helmet. For this first pass, I decided to put on a bit of a thicker layer of Bondo spot putty. Though looking back on it, I probably should have hit it with a little Rust-Oleum filler first. But I think my line of thinking here was that I could pretty easily see where the print lines were, so I skipped straight to Bondo. Most of this project was done during the summer, so from here on out, a lot of the footage you're going to see is me in my garage, which turned out to be the perfect place for all of the sanding and spray painting that I would do. My basement also has a really nice workbench that I did some of my work at, but especially when working with harsh chemicals, it's super important to be in a well-ventilated area to keep yourself safe. Speaking of keeping yourself safe, please wear a respirator or a mask throughout this process and proper eye protection. I cannot stress this enough. Keep your lungs happy and stuff out of your eyes, and you'll be happy you did. After quite a bit of sanding, I finally got to hit the helmet with its first layer of primer. You'll also probably notice that I have a very sophisticated DIY helmet stand propping this thing up, made of not 2, but 4 cinder blocks and an old curtain rod smooshed in between them. Can't say I'm not creative. And while that did work, I knew that once I got into really painting this thing, this method probably wasn't going to cut it. Definitely did not want to risk the helmet falling off in the middle of spraying. That would be very tragic. So I took the opportunity to make a helmet stand out of some leftover wood from a previous project I did over the winter. I won't pretend like I'm some professional DIYer, but I ultimately just needed something with a wide base, sturdy, and wouldn't break the budget. So I took a large sheet of plywood that I used as the base and made a small cutout in the middle of the actual stand. I then reinforced the bottom of the stand with 2 thicker pieces of wood on either side and then used wood glue to put it all together. To keep it as secure as possible, I then cut up some of the thicker wood and then created a Jenga-like support system on the bottom to make sure that the stand stood straight up. The stand itself took only about another hour or so of work, and it was definitely well worth the effort. After about a day of letting the stand dry and the helmet dry, I tried it out and it worked. So this is what I used for the remainder of the project anytime that I needed to paint the helmet. At this point, there weren't a ton of print lines left that were visible, so I just decided to do one more light layer of Bondo on the whole helmet, but this time mixed it with acetone to lay on a much less thicker layer. My only regret here is not being super careful around certain smaller details of the helmet, but the only downside was just more time sanding, which honestly was fine with me. Ultimately, I didn't really care how long the sanding and priming step took, especially it being my second prop ever. What mattered here was learning the process, enjoying the process, and of course, taking it slow to be as safe as possible. Also, now is a good time to mention that at this point, I started to record some summaries of whatever step I was on, so here's a bit of some real-time commentary on how things were going. Alrighty, so we are on our last day of filling and sanding. I just finished what I hope is my last pass through of sanding, of dry sanding. I am going to end up doing some wet sanding once I put some more primer on tomorrow morning, but went over some details. Looks pretty good. I think that I got out as much Bondo as I could. I definitely put a lot on, but I tried to fill in with more Bondo where the cracks were. But I don't think that the cracks are really going to go anywhere, unfortunately. I'm going to just let this dry overnight since I just rinsed off all of the dust. And then tomorrow morning, I'm going to hit it with one more layer of filler primer and then hopefully start painting. Just did my second layer of filler, and honestly, it's looking pretty great. I got a couple of spots I think I'm going to end up going over. So like there's some print lines on the chin here. On the top, you can still see this print line right here. So that I'm probably gonna end up trying to go over maybe one more time. And then this actually ended up filling in pretty well. You can definitely still see the crack though. So this last sanding pass was definitely worth the time and the effort because it's looking significantly better now. One other part that I tried to make sure to hit was also the inside of the helmet. You can still see that there are some print lines on the inside here, but now it's all one solid color and it should look good from the inside as well. You can definitely still see in some areas where parts of the helmet came together. Not really concerned about that from the inside. Nobody's going to see that except for me. So it looks much better. Been a couple weeks since we've worked on this, but we also ran into a small problem. So I'll put some pictures of what it looked like when I discovered it. But essentially, this side of the helmet, it's split. Now, on top of needing to fix the issue that was happening at the top here, this part completely became separated from the helmet, so I had to super glue this back together. I am officially part of the Discord server for the Halo prop making community, so after talking with a couple of community members online, they recommended that I buy this stuff, which is a acrylic fast setting like glue. I was telling them how I only super glued the pieces together and immediately was told, hey, next time you should probably sand the pieces a little bit, that way there's better seals, which is essentially what caused this issue here. Other people were also chimed in and said you really need to reinforce the inside of the helmet. So for the next helmet that we do, I will definitely make sure to do that so I don't have to go back and do any extra steps. But you can see all of the joins are reinforced now with this acrylic plastic cement. So I'm going to let it sit overnight. And then unfortunately what I will have to do is I'm going to have to probably maybe put some more filler primer on some of these areas that are a little bit more prominent now. But hopefully these should hold a little bit better this time around, and then we can finally get to painting this thing. Hopefully by the time that this is done, drying. We'll be ready to paint it shortly after. So that's just a quick little update of where we're at with this thing. So almost there. After that, I spent one more day of applying some Bondo and filler, and I'm happy to say that this plus the acrylic cement finally got rid of the crack on the dome, and it was finally in a place where it was ready for some real paint. What you're seeing here is me applying my first non-primer paint, which was the silver base coat. The lesson that I learned here is that I needed to be slow and careful with the technique I was using when applying layers. Ultimately, the silver base coat went on fine, but I think going a bit slower and smaller applications would have been helpful. I did end up using this technique later on with future layers, but I'll admit that it didn't come without a couple of setbacks. While waiting for the silver base coat to dry, I hopped into Procreate and started to mock up what colors would go where. I didn't stray too far off from the original colors of the ODST armor, but I wanted to make sure I added my own flair to the helmet, especially if I decided to do a full set of armor down the line. I ended up going with a small purple stripe on the top with a small white accent line on the outside, which is pretty similar to the colors I would choose for my own avatar when playing Halo growing up. Once I had finally landed on final colors, it was time to get back to painting, starting with the base green coat using Montana Gold Basalt. Unfortunately, this spray can did give me some issues. All right, I just put the base coat of the helmet, and only thing I'm noticing is that it's a little clumpy. Maybe it's just because it's how it's drying. Not entirely sure, but you can definitely see it on this side. So I'm gonna let it dry overnight, and then we'll come back in the morning and we'll see how it looks. The other thing that I did too, you can kind of see liquid latex on the side here. I put in little areas around the helmet that will have silver sticking out of it, so that'll look really cool too. Hopefully the texture will kind of go away a little bit. Or I can do something about it, but otherwise looks great. Now it was time to start the design at the top. I started with covering the areas I didn't want painted with saran wrap and painter's tape, and the first color I laid down was Montana Gold NATO Green. I had a lot less issues with this can compared to the Basalt, and applying it was significantly easier. You can see that I used smaller movements with the can and applied it lightly, and the end result was much smoother. Plus, I shook the can for a bit longer, so that helped. The good news is with the Basalt, I was able to sand off some of the clumpiness that happened, and you'll see that by the end, the textures of the paint ended up evening out. In order to create straight lines for the stripes, I mounted a level above my workstation and started to draw out where I would lay the next layer of painter's tape. This part was a little tough since the curvature of the helmet distorted the line I was using as my reference. I believe what I did was I measured about 1.5 inches from the outside edge and drew my reference line from the top to the bottom at the same width. There may have been a better way to do this, so let me know in the comments if you've done this before and if you have any advice for me for next time. Overall, though, it came out pretty well, and it was ready for the purple. The color that I chose for this layer was Montana Gold Black Purple. And as soon as I started spraying this, it really started to feel like the helmet was finally coming together. It felt like the avatars I created on multiplayer all those years back were coming to life. I definitely geeked out a little bit while I was putting this layer on.
Cool. That looks cool.
Definitely need to take a second to appreciate the color here. It was pretty awesome. One quick tip, if you happen to use Montana Gold spray paints for your projects, I highly recommend using their color palettes on their website. You can very easily take the hex color codes and apply them to your helmet digitally like I did in Procreate. I'll provide the link in the description with other resources I used for this project. Once that dried, it was just the white stripe left. This stripe was only about 1/2 inch wide from top to bottom. I actually realized shortly before recording this that I didn't purchase any white spray paint, so I had to run out to Home Depot and quickly got some Rust-Oleum flat white. Honestly, nothing too fancy. My only mistake here was not letting the white dry for long enough. Honestly, at this point, I got a little excited and waited only about 2 or 3 hours before peeling away the painter's tape. And thankfully, the painter's tape came off fine, but I just had some run marks in areas where paint wasn't fully dry. But you'll see in a little bit that that was very easy to fix. The last color to apply was the black, and thus began a long evening of applying more painter's tape. I've heard some folks say that laying painter's tape down and sanding are two of the most tedious parts of prop making. Honestly, for me though, it's not all that bad. The long hours in the garage meant listening to a lot of music and catching up on some podcasts. On a few nights, I even brought my laptop out and finished watching the Clone Wars series. It inspired me to do some Star Wars props, so maybe I'll do that next. Anyways, a few hours later, everything important was covered with either painter's tape or saran wrap, and it was time for the last color, Montana Gold Shock Black. No issues with this can either. Thankfully, by this time, I had hit my stride with proper spraying technique. The next day, the tape came off, and for the first time, I got to see the helmet in its fully painted form. To finally see only what I had imagined in my head right in front of me was a pretty cool moment. I also peeled away the liquid latex to reveal the silver base coat underneath, and at this point took a good look at the paint and the scuffs I created with the latex. There wasn't much to fix, but I did want to make sure that I cleaned up some of the lines on the top and make the scuffs and paint chips a bit more prominent. Thankfully, this didn't take long at all. I worked from the outside in and painted the basalt where the white was showing, then the purple stripe where the white was showing. By the way, don't do what I did and spray the paint directly into a red Solo cup. Yeah, that was a bad idea. Don't do that. Use a stronger plastic container or just spray the paint directly onto your brush. After this, I switched to regular acrylic paints and filled in some of the black in the deeper crevices, and then worked on the scuffs to make them a bit more noticeable with a metallic silver paint that happened to match the silver base coat pretty well. This didn't take long to dry, so about an hour or so later, I did some weathering by using an acrylic wash, which is just a bit of black paint and water. My first few applications didn't do much, so I made my solution a bit thicker and then let the wash seep in for a bit longer. I've heard that some folks do an oil-based solution mixed with mineral spirits, which I did have access to, but I decided to stick with the acrylic solution just to be safe. Didn't want the fresh paint job to quickly be ruined by the wrong technique, and I know that acrylic paint in general is very forgiving. I think that we can finally say that painting is done. I just finished doing the weathering. It's drying right now. I was able today to fix up some of the uneven lines. You can kind of see them, but whatever. It's looks much better than it did before. But the detail on this it exceeds my expectations. I really wasn't sure how it was going to look, but it looks rough. It's painted really cool. It's awesome. I'm so pleased with how this came out. It feels like this step has really gone on forever, but taking my time has really been beneficial, taking it, little piece by piece. I think the final phase is going to just be putting in the visor, which I'm going to take a little time to kind of research and make sure that I do it properly and do it in a way that is obviously going to not damage the visor that I bought. We'll see where this goes. After a few days of research, I decided to go with gluing small visor clips on the inside to keep the visor secure and in place. There are a few ways to insert visors into helmets, but this just seemed to be the easiest and most accessible way to get the job done. Plus, if I ever decide to do another ODST helmet, the visor can easily be taken out and inserted into a new helmet. The clips were designed and provided by Galactic Armory as well, so I'll provide the link to their video where I got the files from. I first tried to hot glue the clips in place, but quickly realized that this didn't work and switched to trusty Gorilla Glue. Also, didn't mention this earlier, but after finishing painting, but before gluing the clips in, I did spray the whole helmet with an outer clear coat just to preserve the paint and the weathering. And that's about it. That's how I got from a raw 3D print to my first ODST helmet. Just wanted to quickly thank again the 405th community, both on the site and the Discord server. Y'all helped me a lot through this process. And another shout out to Galactic Armory again for providing the files, the visor, and their ODST build series that helped me with staying on track and providing some great tips. My goal is to do a full suit of armor in time to cosplay at PAX East in May of 2025, so make sure to like this video and subscribe to see the rest of the armor as I complete it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.